Imagine a courtroom, not for the living, but for the dead. A former pope, exhumed months after his burial, robed in decaying vestments, propped on a throne, and subjected to a full ecclesiastical trial. This isn't a macabre fiction. This is the chilling, true history of the Cadaver Synod, one of the most grotesque and scandalous judicial proceedings ever recorded. Our journey begins in 9th century Rome, a tumultuous era for the papacy, fraught with political intrigue, theological battles, and a desperate struggle for power that would tear the very fabric of the Holy See. At the center of this extraordinary drama stands Pope Formosus, whose controversial election and papacy would spark a feud that even death could not quell. And his accuser, Pope Stephen VI, a man consumed by a vengeful obsession so profound, he dared to put a dead pontiff on trial. As we unravel this truly bizarre saga, we will delve into the deep political and theological roots that allowed such madness to flourish. We'll explore the desperate rivalries between powerful Roman factions, the intricate web of canonical law twisted beyond recognition, and the raw human ambition that drove men to extremes. Prepare to witness a spectacle of unprecedented horror and fascinating historical significance. This is the story of Rome's most scandalous papal tribunal, the dead pope on trial. Imagine a world where law and order are distant memories, where the very fabric of society is tearing apart. Welcome to 9th century Italy, a land plunged into an era history would aptly name the Dark Ages. Following the grandeur of Charlemagne's Carolingian Empire, a sudden and brutal power vacuum emerged. With no dominant emperor to command respect, ambitious local strongmen, dukes, and counts carved out their own territories, constantly warring for supremacy. Brigandage was rife, cities were isolated, and the roads were perilous. Amidst this brutal landscape of shifting allegiances and bloody feuds, one institution, the papacy, found itself not merely caught in the crossfire, but often the grand prize itself, a spiritual authority besieged by earthly ambition. In this chaotic crucible, the papacy, intended to be a beacon of spiritual guidance, became a pawn in a ruthless political game. The very chair of St. Peter, a symbol of divine authority, was deeply entangled with the volatile secular powers of Rome and its surrounding territories. Popes, once chosen for their piety, were now frequently installed and removed by the whims of powerful Roman aristocratic factions, the likes of the Theophylax or the Spoleto family, often through bribery, intimidation, or outright violence. The sacred office became a prize, leading to an alarming succession of pontiffs, many whose reigns were tragically brief and ended in suspicious circumstances. This period saw rapid, often violent turnovers, staining the hallowed halls of the Vatican with political intrigue and bloodshed as the spiritual leader was dragged into the mud of temporal power struggles. It was into this volatile world that we introduce Formosus. Born around 816, he was no ordinary cleric. Unlike many of his contemporaries who clawed their way to power, Formosus rose through merit. By 864, he had become the respected and highly capable bishop of Porto, a vital port city just north of Rome. Formosus was renowned for his keen intellect, his command of diplomacy, and a deep understanding of theological principles, qualities that made him an invaluable asset to several popes. He was a man of impressive stature and charisma, described as distinguished in countenance and character, a prelate whose intellectual prowess and political acumen set him apart in an era often defined by brute force. His journey to the papacy would be anything but straightforward, marked by both triumph and profound conflict. Formosus's exceptional talents did not go unnoticed, even beyond the Italian peninsula. His early career saw him undertake a crucial diplomatic mission to Bulgaria in the 860s, a pagan land on the cusp of converting to Christianity. Such was his profound impact and influence there, that the Bulgarian Tsar Boris, I was deeply impressed, offering Formosus the prestigious position of Patriarch of Bulgaria. This, however, was a grave canonical problem. Church law strictly forbade a bishop from abandoning his own diocese to become a bishop or patriarch of another. This proposed transfer led to a direct and serious conflict with then-Pope John VIII, a powerful and often ruthless pontiff. This was Formosus's first major clash with papal authority, a preview of the bitter rivalries and rigid legalism that would define his tumultuous path. Formosus's perceived ambition in the Bulgarian affair, combined with his involvement in various political maneuverings within Rome, particularly a conspiracy against John VIII imperial candidate, Lambert of Spoleto, proved to be his undoing. Pope John VIII, a man not to be crossed, saw Formosus's actions as a direct challenge to papal authority. In 876, John VIII convened a synod and, under the weight of severe political accusations, excommunicated Formosus. The charges were numerous: deserting his see, conspiring against the emperor, and violating his oath. Formosus was publicly disgraced, forced to swear a solemn and binding oath, never to return to Rome and never, under any circumstances, to seek the papacy. This vow, extracted under duress, would later become the very instrument of his posthumous condemnation, a dark promise that haunted his future. But in the turbulent world of 9th century Rome, power shifted as rapidly as the wind. Pope John VIII, Formosus's stern accuser, met his end in 882, allegedly poisoned and then bludgeoned to death, a testament to the brutal realities of papal politics. With John VIII gone, the political climate began to change. His successors, notably Pope Marinus I, took a more lenient view of Formosus's earlier transgressions. Recognizing his deep theological knowledge and diplomatic experience, Marinus I absolved Formosus of his excommunication and released him from his restrictive oath. The path back to Rome was cleared, and the highly respected Bishop of Porto, though once cast out, was welcomed back into the fold of the Roman clergy. The stage was now set for his extraordinary and profoundly controversial return to prominence. After several intervening pontificates, Formosus's long and arduous journey culminated in a seismic event. In 891, he was elected pope. The decision was met with a mix of celebration and immediate, fierce opposition. His election was, by ancient church law, a profound irregularity. Canon law explicitly forbade a bishop from transferring from one see or diocese to another, a rule meant to prevent ambition and ensure stability. Formosus, already the Bishop of Porto, had effectively transferred to the See of Rome. This direct violation of established canonical norms provided his enemies with a potent weapon, casting a long shadow over the legitimacy of his pontificate from its very inception. His elevation, though celebrated by some, ignited a firestorm of controversy that would burn long after his death, fueling the very trial we are here to explore. Formosus's papacy, though controversial, immediately faced a more pressing and immediate external threat: the powerful and ambitious Duchy of Spoleto. Italy remained a battleground, and the House of Spoleto, under the formidable Guy III, sought to dominate the peninsula. Guy III had been crowned emperor by Formosus's predecessor, Pope Stephen V, consolidating immense power. Formosus, acutely aware of Spoleto's aggressive expansionism and its growing dominance over both Italy and the papacy itself, viewed them with deep suspicion. He saw their ambitions as a direct threat to the independence of the Church and to the political balance of power he sought to restore. This uneasy alliance and Formosus's determination to resist Spoleto would set the stage for a dangerous geopolitical game, forcing him to seek allies beyond Italy, a move that would have fatal consequences. To counter the escalating threat from the ambitious Spoleto dynasty, Pope Formosus, ever the pragmatist, made a desperate and audacious move. He looked beyond Italy's tumultuous borders, summoning a powerful ally from the north, Arnulf of Carinthia, the mighty East Frankish king. In 895, Arnulf answered the call, leading his formidable Bavarian forces across the Alps. This wasn't merely a show of force, it was a decisive intervention. Formosus himself crowned Arnulf Holy Roman Emperor in Rome in February 896, a move designed to cement a new, pro-Frankish power balance in Italy. But while Formosus saw salvation, the Spoleto faction saw an unforgivable betrayal. This imperial coronation only intensified their simmering rage, igniting a deeper, more personal vendetta that would soon plunge Rome into madness. Arnulf's intervention, though initially successful in driving back the Spoletans, proved to be a fleeting victory. The harsh Italian climate and a sudden, debilitating illness forced the East Frankish emperor to withdraw his forces, leaving Formosus once again exposed. The fragile balance of power, so painstakingly achieved, shattered almost immediately. With Arnulf gone, the Spoleto faction, now firmly under the leadership of Lambert, wasted no time reasserting their dominance over central Italy and Rome. Formosus, increasingly isolated and vulnerable, spent his final years in a precarious political tightrope walk. Every decision, every alliance, every breath was measured against the ever-present threat of Spoleto's vengeful return. The storm clouds were gathering, and Rome, caught between powerful competing dynasties, braced for the inevitable. Then, in April of 896, the precarious tightrope walk of Pope Formosus came to an abrupt end. He died, seemingly of natural causes, in his early 80s. For some, it was the natural conclusion of a long and tumultuous life. For others, particularly the ascendant Spoleto faction, it was an opportunity. His death removed the primary obstacle, the very man who had dared to defy them and crown their rival as emperor. It was a pivotal moment, a vacuum of power that Rome had become all too familiar with. Unbeknownst to the mourners preparing his solemn burial in St. Peter's Basilica, Formosus's passing was not an ending, but merely the prologue. The stage was now set, the protagonist removed, and the antagonists were ready to unleash a spectacle of vengeance unlike anything Christendom had ever witnessed. The immediate aftermath of Formosus's death was a stark illustration of Rome's brutal instability. The papacy, instead of becoming a beacon of spiritual authority, was a prize to be seized, a pawn in a brutal political game. Formosus's immediate successor was a man named Boniface VI. His election was swift, but his reign was shockingly brief, lasting a mere 15 days. Accounts vary on the specifics of his demise, but most historians agree his papacy ended abruptly, likely through violence or forced deposition by the resurgent Spoleto faction. This fleeting, violent interlude underscores the volatile and dangerous nature of the period. The chair of St. Peter was barely warm before another contender was installed, yet another demonstration that the spiritual realm was subservient to the raw, visceral power struggles unfolding in Rome. With the inconveniently brief papacy of Boniface VI quickly extinguished, the Spoleto faction finally consolidated their grip on Rome. This was their moment. They moved with ruthless efficiency, ensuring that the next occupant of St. Peter's chair would be unequivocally their man. That man was Pope Stephen VI. Formerly the Bishop of Anagni, Stephen was a staunch and zealous partisan of the Spoleto family, deeply indebted to them for his elevation. More critically, he harbored a profound and personal animosity towards the late Formosus, an animosity that went beyond mere political rivalry. Stephen VI was not just a supporter of Spoleto. He was an instrument of their vengeful will, a figure whose ascent heralded a dark new chapter in papal history. What fueled Stephen VI's visceral hatred for his predecessor? It was a toxic cocktail of political score-settling and a twisted sense of religious justice. Firstly, Stephen was a loyal protege of the Spoleto family. He saw Formosus's actions, particularly inviting Arnulf and crowning him emperor, as a direct and unforgivable assault on his patrons. This was political revenge, pure and simple, for the humiliation and defeat suffered by the Spoletans. But interwoven with this political vendetta were profound theological grievances. Stephen and his allies accused Formosus of multiple canonical violations, transferring sees, perjuring himself, and even being ordained illegally. These accusations, though perhaps flimsy, provided the moral and religious pretext for the unprecedented act Stephen VI was about to unleash. The seeds of vengeance had been sown, nurtured by ambition and fanaticism, and they were about to bear grotesque fruit. The idea itself was unthinkable, monstrous even. To put a dead man, a former pope, on trial. This was not merely an act of political retribution. It was an attempt to utterly erase Formosus from history, to invalidate his entire papacy and every ordination he had performed. How could such a macabre, an unprecedented concept have taken root? It emerged from a crucible of extreme political pressure, fueled by the Spoleto faction's insatiable hunger for revenge and exacerbated by Stephen VI's religious zealotry. To denounce Formosus after his death would justify the Spoleto dynasty's power and consolidate Stephen's own authority. It would purge Rome of what they considered Formosus's illegitimate legacy. It was an act of pure desperation and fanaticism, twisting the sacred halls of justice into a theater of the absurd, blurring the lines between the living and the dead. The unthinkable quickly became the undeniable. In a move that shocked even the most hardened Romans, Pope Stephen VI issued his chilling decree. 9 months after Formosus had been laid to rest in the hallowed grounds of St. Peter's Basilica, Stephen ordered his body exhumed. Imagine the scene: a dark, moonless night, the flickering glow of torches casting long, dancing shadows across the ancient stones. The macabre sounds of picks and shovels breaking through sacred earth, the gasps of horrified onlookers. Formosus's decaying corpse, now a grisly relic, was not permitted to rest. It was to be brought forth, dragged from its eternal slumber, to stand trial before a vengeful living pope. This was the first, and perhaps most grotesque, step in the saga of the Cadaver Synod, a truly ghastly decree that heralded an era of unparalleled judicial madness. Deep within the hallowed confines of Rome's ancient Lateran Basilica, an unprecedented and grotesque spectacle was about to unfold. This wasn't a solemn mass, nor a sacred ordination. Instead, the grand ecclesiastical heart of the city had been chillingly transformed into a court of law, its sacred spaces now imbued with an unsettling dread. Shadows stretched long across the mosaic floors, cast by flickering torches that barely illuminated the grim faces of cardinals, bishops, and Roman nobles. At the very center of this macabre scene, where the most revered figures of the church usually stood, sat the accused, not a living man, but a decaying corpse propped upright, awaiting judgment. Presiding over this travesty was Pope Stephen VI, his eyes burning with an unholy fire, ready to condemn the dead. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the chilling presence of vengeance. Then the doors creaked open, and what emerged sent a collective shiver through the assembly. Carried in by nervous deacons was the grotesque central figure of this unthinkable trial, the cadaver of Pope Formosus. 9 months interred, his body was now a horrifying testament to the relentless march of decay. Yet, in a morbid parody of respect, he had been exhumed, dressed in full, albeit tattered and stained, papal vestments. His decomposing form, propped awkwardly on a throne, his head lolling to one side, was a silent, unspeakable witness. The mitre, once a symbol of divine authority, now sat askew on his skull-like head, and the once regal robes hung loosely on his shrunken frame. It was a sight designed not just to accuse, but to utterly dehumanize and defile, mocking the very sanctity of the papacy. Standing opposite this silent, decaying effigy of his predecessor was Pope Stephen VI, his face a contorted mask of righteous fury. He was not merely a judge, he was the zealous prosecutor, a man possessed by a venomous hatred that transcended the grave. Pointing an accusing finger at the rotting Formosus, Stephen launched into a furious tirade, his voice echoing through the vast basilica. He verbally abused the silent corpse, bellowing charges of ambition, perjury, and sacrilege. Every word was laced with a palpable, almost personal, hatred, transforming the trial into a theatrical display of raw, unrestrained vengeance. The living pontiff screamed at the dead, demanding answers from a mouth that could no longer speak, turning the very act of justice into a grotesque and terrifying performance. In a macabre nod to judicial process, a young deacon was reluctantly assigned to speak on behalf of the deceased Formosus. Placed precariously close to the decaying body, the terrified cleric was supposed to answer Stephen VI's furious interrogations. His voice, barely a whisper, trembled as he attempted to articulate a defense, responding for a man long past speech. It was a cruel and cynical charade. The deacon, pale and visibly distressed, could offer no genuine counterargument against Stephen's relentless onslaught. His role was purely farcical, a thin veil draped over a predetermined verdict. This pitiful performance only served to highlight the utter mockery of justice at play, underscoring the chilling reality that Formosus was condemned long before the synod even began. The accusations against Formosus went far beyond the translatio episcopi, the illegal transfer from one bishopric to another, which was already a severe ecclesiastical crime. Pope Stephen VI, fueled by political animosity and a desperate need to delegitimize Formosus's papacy, piled on an array of damning charges. Formosus was accused of apostasy for allegedly abandoning his episcopal duties. More gravely, he was charged with perjury for supposedly breaking a solemn oath made to Pope John VIII, promising never to return to Rome or reclaim his bishopric. But the most incendiary accusation was that of sheer ambition, that Formosus had unlawfully seized the papal throne itself, climbing to power through deceit and unholy means. These were not mere technicalities. They were an attempt to erase his entire pontificate from history. The outcome was never in doubt. With a theatrical flourish and chilling certainty, the synod delivered its unanimous verdict. Formosus was guilty on all counts. The charges of apostasy, perjury, and unlawful ambition were confirmed, effectively condemning a dead man for crimes that, in life, had never been truly proven. This condemnation was not merely symbolic. It carried profound and destructive consequences. All of Formosus's acts as pope, every ordination, every decree, every official document, were declared null and void. The very legitimacy of his papacy was stripped away, paving the way for an even greater degradation. This wasn't just a legal pronouncement. It was an act of historical erasure, designed to obliterate his legacy and send a terrifying message to any who dared defy papal authority. The verdict was only the prelude to the true horror. With the condemnation pronounced, the physical desecration of Formosus's corpse began. In a shocking display of contempt, his papal vestments, the symbols of his sacred office, were violently stripped from his decaying body. This act alone would have been a profound humiliation, but Pope Stephen VI demanded more. In a particularly gruesome and symbolic act of ultimate degradation, the 3 fingers of Formosus's right hand, specifically the ones used for bestowing papal blessings, were gruesomely severed. This mutilation was not just an act of violence against the corpse. It was a deliberate and calculated assault on the very concept of the papacy, a terrifying message that even death could not protect against absolute vengeance. A collective gasp, or a horrified silence, surely filled the basilica as the unthinkable unfolded. Having been stripped of his vestments and his blessing fingers severed, Formosus's desecrated body was then deemed unworthy of consecrated ground. It was unceremoniously dragged out of the basilica and cast into a common grave, a shallow, ignominious pit reserved for the most reviled or unclaimed. This act alone would have been a horrifying end to a papal reign, an ultimate damnation. But Stephen VI's vengeful fury knew no bounds. Not content with this dishonorable burial, he soon issued yet another decree. The mutilated cadaver of Pope Formosus, now even more decayed, was to be exhumed once again, not for reburial, but for a final, even more shocking act of posthumous punishment that would plunge the Cadaver Synod into truly unfathomable depths of depravity. With the verdict delivered and the rituals of degradation complete, the ultimate act of humiliation awaited Formosus's defiled corpse. Stripped of his vestments, the body was dragged through the unforgiving streets of Rome, a macabre procession culminating at the banks of the Tiber River. There, under the cold, indifferent gaze of the Roman sky, the former pontiff's cadaver was unceremoniously heaved into the murky waters. This wasn't merely a disposal. It was an act of profound spiritual annihilation. To cast a body into the Tiber was to erase its memory, to deny it a Christian burial, and to condemn its soul to an eternal wandering. Pope Stephen VI sought not just to condemn Formosus's papacy, but to obliterate his very existence, ensuring his legitimacy vanished beneath the currents of history. But the extreme brutality of the Cadaver Synod did not go unnoticed nor unopposed. While Stephen VI had intended to assert his dominance, the grotesque spectacle sparked widespread horror and revulsion among the Roman populace. Whispers turned to murmurs, and murmurs to outright discontent. Tales of superstition began to circulate. Stories of Formosus's waterlogged corpse being washed ashore, its hands still raised in a blessing, or of spectral figures haunting the Tiber's banks. This wasn't just political disagreement. It was a profound sense of sacrilege, a violation of Christian burial rites that shocked the conscience of a devout city. The very air of Rome grew heavy with unease, and the seeds of Stephen VI's downfall were sown in the fertile ground of public outrage. The Cadaver Synod, intended as a powerful demonstration of Stephen VI's authority, proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Its horrific nature alienated many, even within his own faction, who recoiled from the sheer barbarity of the proceedings. The grotesque trial galvanized his political enemies, who now had irrefutable evidence of the Pope's depravity and instability. Previously divided factions began to coalesce, unified by a common disgust and the urgent need to restore dignity to the papacy. The tide of public opinion, once perhaps swayed by Stephen's initial fervor, now turned decisively against him. The stage was set, not for his consolidation of power, but for a rapid and inevitable downfall, orchestrated by those who could no longer tolerate such an affront to sacred tradition. The swift, brutal reversal of fortune that followed was a stark testament to the volatility of 9th-century Roman politics. In a matter of weeks, Pope Stephen VI, the architect of the Cadaver Synod, found himself stripped of his power, arrested, and imprisoned by his opponents. His confinement was not in a comfortable palace, but within the dark, formidable walls of Castel Sant'Angelo, a former imperial mausoleum that had become a papal fortress and prison. There, in the summer of 897 AD, Stephen met his own violent end, strangled to death by his captors. The irony was chillingly profound. The very man who had subjected a dead pope to such indignity, who had sought to erase a predecessor, now suffered a similarly ignominious and violent fate, mirroring the very brutality he had so eagerly inflicted upon Formosus. The death of Stephen VI did not usher in an era of peace, but rather plunged the papacy deeper into a period of unprecedented instability. The immediate aftermath saw a rapid succession of short-lived popes, each occupying the chair of St. Peter for mere months, sometimes even weeks. This was not a period of spiritual guidance, but a desperate scramble for power, marked by factionalism and political maneuvering. Each new pontiff felt compelled to condemn the actions of their immediate predecessors, issuing decrees that annulled previous ones, only to have their own acts repudiated by the next. Scrolls were torn, records were altered, and legacies were erased and rewritten with bewildering speed. The Roman Church became a battleground, its governance descending into chaos, a reflection of the profound moral and political decay consuming Rome itself. Amidst this relentless cycle of condemnation and counter-condemnation, a glimmer of sanity finally emerged. Less than a year after Stephen VI's death, Pope Theodore II ascended to the papal throne. In a courageous and decisive move, Theodore II acted to restore some semblance of legitimacy and dignity to the Roman See. He convened a synod that officially and emphatically annulled the Cadaver Synod, declaring its proceedings illegal and invalid. Then, in an act of profound penance and respect, Formosus's body was painstakingly retrieved from the depths of the Tiber River. Treated with reverence and solemnity, the recovered remains of the much-maligned pontiff were finally reburied with full papal honors in St. Peter's Basilica. It was a poignant attempt to heal the gaping wound Formosus's trial had inflicted upon the soul of the Church. The Cadaver Synod, for all its individual madness, is often cited as a prime example of a much larger, darker historical epic, the Saeculum Obscurum, or Iron Century. This period, roughly spanning the late 9th to mid-11th centuries, reflects the profound moral and political decline of the papacy. It was an age marked by unprecedented abuses of power, rampant corruption, and the suffocating interference of secular Roman aristocratic families who treated the papal office as a personal prize. The trial of Formosus, with its theatrical cruelty and blatant disregard for sacred law, perfectly encapsulates the chaos, vendettas, and the almost complete loss of spiritual authority that defined this dark era. It was a time when the Holy See, meant to be a beacon of divine guidance, instead became a pawn in a brutal earthly game. Beyond the political machinations and the grotesque spectacle, the Cadaver Synod ripped open fundamental questions about canon law and the very integrity of the papacy. It was a blatant and unprecedented violation of established church law, which strictly prohibited posthumous trials and the desecration of the deceased. The Synod challenged the spiritual principle that a person's judgment was ultimately reserved for God. By attempting to undo Formosus's acts after his death, Stephen VI raised an alarming precedent. Could any papal reign truly be secure? This grotesque judicial proceeding forced the Church to confront the limits of human authority, the sacredness of its traditions, and the critical importance of a stable, incorruptible legal framework to prevent such outrageous abuses of power from ever happening again. The stain of the Cadaver Synod would linger for centuries. The chilling spectacle of the Cadaver Synod wasn't merely an act of revenge. It was a ritual steeped in profound, brutal symbolism. Every grotesque detail, from the stripping of Formosus's decaying robes to the severing of his 3 blessing fingers, a direct attack on his papal authority, was designed to ritually degrade, to nullify his very existence as pope. His corpse, a puppet in this macabre drama, was condemned, symbolically defiled, and ultimately cast into the Tiber, a final act of desecration mirroring the biblical damnation of the wicked. Yet, even in its deepest ignominy, the story held another symbolic layer. When Formosus's body was later recovered and reinterred with full papal honors under Popes Theodore II and Sergius III, it wasn't just rehabilitation. It was a potent act of redemption, a symbolic cleansing that attempted to restore order and signify divine absolution, highlighting the immense spiritual weight attached to every action in this tumultuous era. Beyond the bizarre ritual and macabre theater, the Cadaver Synod stands as a chilling, timeless warning etched into the annals of history. It serves as an unvarnished testament to the dangers of unchecked power, a stark reminder of how political vendetta can warp and weaponize even the most sacred institutions. Pope Stephen VI's vengeful actions against Formosus were not just personal. They were a profound manipulation of religious authority for factional gain, an attempt to erase an enemy not just from life, but from the very fabric of history and divine legitimacy. This unprecedented abuse of the papal office, where spiritual power became a tool for earthly, brutal score settling, echoes through the centuries. It's a chilling parallel to every era where authority, whether religious or secular, has been twisted to silence dissent and enforce tyranny, reminding us that the capacity for such manipulation remains a constant threat. The shadows cast by such an abuse of power stretched far beyond the 9th century, solidifying the Cadaver Synod's place in history as one of its most profoundly infamous events. It's a tale so bizarre, so utterly shocking, that it continues to captivate and horrify scholars and laypeople alike, nearly 1,150 years later. This was not merely a scandalous moment. It was a deeply transgressive act that fundamentally challenged the sanctity of the papacy itself, exposing the raw, brutal political currents churning beneath the veneer of spiritual authority in a turbulent era. The Cadaver Synod remains a unique anomaly, a stark outlier even in the often turbulent history of the Roman Catholic Church. It's a testament to human fallibility, ambition, and the enduring, often grotesque, lengths to which power struggles can lead, forever defining a singular moment in time where a dead man stood trial, and the Church itself wrestled with its own dark reflection. From the shadowy intrigues of 9th century Rome to the shockingly surreal courtroom of the Cadaver Synod, we have journeyed through a chapter of history that defies belief. We have witnessed the controversial reign of Pope Formosus, a pontiff whose life and death became a battleground for relentless Roman factions. And we have seen the vengeful, unprecedented act of Pope Stephen VI, whose desperate attempt to erase his predecessor's legacy dragged the papacy into an abyss of grotesque public spectacle. The image of a decaying corpse, propped up and condemned, serves as a stark, unforgettable reminder of the depths to which the manipulation of power and religious authority can sink. Yet, the story doesn't end with Stephen's triumph. In a swift and ironic twist of fate, the very outrage he orchestrated led to his own downfall, a powerful testament to the inherent dangers of unchecked ambition and the eventual, often brutal, restoration of justice. The Cadaver Synod remains an enduring symbol of a chaotic age, a chilling cautionary tale about the weaponization of faith and the fragility of even the most sacred institutions when confronted with the raw hunger for control. Its infamy endures, a permanent stain on the annals of papal history, prompting us to forever ponder the profound lessons it offers about humanity's capacity for cruelty and the ultimate, inevitable price of absolute power.